Hi everyone, my name's Vidor, and today I'm going to show you how to make Elden Ring's strongest Faith Spellblade build. I want to keep this video brief, so I'm not even going to bother with an intro. Let's just get right into the build. If you find this video helpful, please leave a like, share the video, and consider subscribing. It really helps me out. I like to make my builds at level 125 using the Wretch as my starting class, which is just my personal preference. You can bring this build up to any level you want, and you'd be better off starting as a Vagabond or Prophet if you make this build from scratch, but any class will work just fine. Our first stat is Vigor, and as usual, it's the most important stat for any build. Preferably you'd get 60 Vigor, but I had to sacrifice 5 points to be able to get the other stats I wanted. It's only a loss of like 80 health, so it's not a huge deal, but if you go past level 125, definitely be sure to bring it up to 60. After that comes Mind, and for this build we've got 15. I would have liked to go up to 20 just to have some extra FP overhead, but 15 is plenty. Worst case scenario, just take an extra blue flask. Up next is Endurance at 24. I included several loadouts in this build, and 24 Endurance is what you need to medium roll with the heaviest loadout that I set up, which is for the Fire Knight's Greatsword. If you don't plan on using that for whatever reason, then you can probably get away with bringing Endurance down to 20 or so, and in that case, I would put the spare points into Vigor or Mind. Now come the damage stats. This is a Faith build, so that's obviously going to be our highest stat, but I also wanted some strength and dexterity to be able to use a good variety of weapons. Our highest weapon requirements are for the Fire Knight's Greatsword at 22 strength and 18 dex, so that's what I brought those up to. After that, I just dumped every leftover point into Faith and ended up with 50. Depending on your class, you may have slightly more or less Faith, and that's fine. The build requires a minimum of 38 Faith, so as long as you have at least that, you'll be fine. That's it for the stats, so now let's move on to the weapons. You can find a link to this build's build planner page down in the description, and if you check it out, you'll see I included several weapon and talisman loadouts. You're seeing me use them on screen throughout this video. Pretty much any weapon that gets solid Faith scaling, or has either the Flame Art or Sacred Affinity, will work really well with this build. The main weapons vary a bunch, but there are a couple that every loadout uses. For one, there's the Dryleaf Seal. With this build's stats, the Dryleaf Seal gets the optimal incant scaling, so it'll give you the best damage with your spells. If you don't have the DLC, or you end up with more than 50 Faith, then you can use the Godslayer Seal instead. There's also the Misery Cord, which has the Flame Art Affinity and the Endure Ash of War. I like having Endure available like that, so that I can use it to tank attacks that I have trouble with, such as the Erdtree Avatar Phase 3 Explosion. And the Misery Cord gets very high critical damage, so if you get a stance break or a backstab on an enemy, the Misery Cord will fuck them up. As for the Talismans, again, there are several setups that correspond to the different weapon loadouts, plus a couple that are more general purpose in case you don't want to stick with a specific weapon while you're exploring. I'm trying to keep this video brief, so I'm not going to explain the synergy of every talisman and weapon setup here, but they should be pretty self-explanatory for the most part anyway. With that said, I will write about them down in the description in case you want specifics for why I chose them. Up next is the armor. For this build, I wanted to go with a decently cool looking outfit, and I really like the paladin look that complements the mace and shield loadout. So I went with the Great Helm, Red Mane Surcoat, Blythe's Gauntlets, and the Knight Greaves. Together, these offer decent protection, decent fashion, and 51 poise, making it a decent setup for PvE. If you want to save a bit of weight, then you can use the entire Knight set instead, which offers slightly lower protection, but also weighs slightly less. And I also made a specific jump attack outfit just in case you're running the jump attack spam weapon and talisman loadout. Now let's talk about the spells and buffs. I included a bunch of solid incantations in the build, including Catch Flame, which is a close range burst of flame. It's fast as hell, very spammable, and does a fuckload of fire DPS, making it a really strong bread and butter spell at close range. Fire Serpent, which is a medium range fireball that homes in on enemies. It casts relatively quickly, which helps make it pretty spammable. If you don't have the DLC, then you can try Flame Sling or Black Flame instead, but Fire Serpent is definitely preferred if you can use it. Giant's Flame Take Thee, which is a really big fireball that makes a big explosion. It's great for taking on groups of enemies. Frenzied Burst, which is basically a fire laser beam, it allows you to snipe enemies from a pretty long range, making it good for picking off enemies or softening up groups of enemies before you get close to them. In addition to the offensive spells are also the support and buff spells, including Blessing of the Erdtree, which gives you health regen over time at a rate of 12 points per second for 90 seconds, Golden Vow, which boosts all damage that you do by 15% and reduces all damage you take by 10% for 80 seconds, making it just a great all-purpose buff. Howl of Shabriri, which boosts all damage you do by 25%, but also increases all damage you take by 30% for 40 seconds. It's risky, but it enables you to do some obscene damage if you can handle the debuff. If you can't, or you just don't like taking that risk, then you can use Flame Grant Me Strength instead, which will boost your physical and fire damage by 20% for 30 seconds, and also give you some extra stamina regen. It doesn't last as long, and it's not quite as strong, but it also doesn't make you take 30% more damage, so it's a decent trade-off. And finally, there's Flame Cleanse Me, which lets you cure yourself of poison and rot, making it really useful in case you run into enemies who can inflict those effects on you, such as when I got inflicted by it by Romina, because I'm an idiot. And finally, we had the Crystal Tears and the Wondrous Physic. I use the Opaline Hard Tier, which increases all of your damage negation by 15% for 3 minutes, helping to compensate for Howl of Shabriri and the Fire Scorpion charm that most of the loadouts use. There's also the Flame Shroud and Crack Tier, which boosts all fire damage you do by 20% for 3 minutes, making that one an obvious choice. If you're willing to play it really risky, then you can swap out the Opaline Hard Tier for the Blood-Sucking Crack Tier, which increases all damage you do by 20%, but also drains your health by around 23 points per second for 3 minutes. It's risky, but it'll allow you to get some stupid damage numbers. That's it for the build overview, so now let's jump into the gameplay showcase where I'll show you how this build works and how you can get the most out of it. Alright, so as usual, I'm going to start off by telling you how important it is to use your buffs. Buffs are super important, they give you tons of damage and damage negation, and they really enhance your build. Any good build uses a bunch of buffs. You don't have to use like 76 buffs, we're only using like 4 or 5 on this build. In this one, you want to drink your Wondrous Physic, then cast Blessing of the Erdtree, then drink a blue flask and cast Golden Vow, then cast Howl of Shabriri, and then you can go and attack the bad guy. And so you see in this one, I'm using the Venomous Fang with the Endure Ash of War. Totally forgot that I had Endure. I could have just stood there and fucking tanked all his attacks and done a fuck load of DPS. But I still end up doing pretty good damage. This loadout uses the Kindred of Rot's Exaltation and the Poisoned Hand. So I get like 2 20% damage buffs, or I think Poisoned Hand might be 10% or something, I don't know the exact number. But I get a whole bunch of damage once I inflict that poison on the enemy, and you saw my DPS just went through the fucking roof, because that loadout is just ridiculous. Here's a brief clip of exploration gameplay. I want to kill these Albinarics before they summon bad guys on the stairs here, so I hit them with the Fire Serpent because you've got different tools for different situations. You can also use something like Frenzied Burst, which is a fire laser, and it's cool as hell. In this clip, I'm going to fight Commander Nile using the Blasphemous Blade. So the Blasphemous Blade loadout has the Misericord in the left hand, and it has the Sacred Order Ash of War. And so there's going to be a card in the top right corner about my off-sack video. But basically, if you have a weapon with Sacred Order in your offhand, and that weapon has Sacred Order active, so you can tell by the fact that the Misericord is glowing yellow that Sacred Order is still active, then it boosts all damage you do by 10% for 60 seconds, and it's great. And so you can see I'm just absolutely melting Nile using the Blasphemous Blade here. My only problem is that I forgot to take a couple more blue flasks, and so I ran out of FP because I only had 4. So this last bit of it's going to be a slog, and I'm just going to speed through it. But yeah, so if you're using something that relies on Ashes of War a lot, or if you're casting the spells a lot, then Sacred Order is an additional buff that you can add to this build. Make sure you take a look at the different loadouts that I have and take advantage of all the stuff that they have in them. For example, I'm not going to show this whole clip right now because you saw it at the start of the video, but like with the mace here, I have the Flaming Strike Ash of War on it. So what I did was I used Flaming Strike, and then I do its follow-up, which is the heavy attack, and that buffs the mace with additional fire damage, and so it's going to do even more damage than if I was just hitting him with the mace by itself. So one of the reasons why I wanted to make this build was specifically for this loadout here. So I'm using the Clean Rot Knight Sword with the Flame Spear Ash of War. When you use Flame Spear, it buffs the sword with, I think, like 160 fire damage for like 60 seconds or something like that. So it adds a fuckload of fire damage to it, and with the Flame Art Affinity, it's already doing a ton of fire damage to begin with. And then we have the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, which buffs both the physical and fire damage, and it just pokes fast as hell because it's a thrusting sword, and so it just does like ridiculous DPS, and especially since we've got the Winged Sword Insignia and Millicent's, or the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia and Millicent's Prosthesis, it just does obscene amounts of damage. You know, I am fighting the Erdtree avatar, which is really weak to fire, so that also helps it. But even against other enemies, it just shreds anything, you know, and it's just like so basic. You're just hitting R1 to poke them with the fucking stick. But yeah, so it's awesome. I love this loadout. And so this is one of those types of loadouts that I want to talk about, where it's like, you can do this on any build that you make, you know. In the Intelligent Spellblade build, I did the same thing, but instead of using Flame Spear, I used Endure with the Magic Affinity, because there's nothing that buffs the sword with more magic damage. If I was doing like a Lightning build, I could use Lightning Slash and buff the sword with Lightning like that. You know, it's the same thing no matter what you're doing. You're just doing it with a different, you know, elemental damage, basically. Okay, so there, you saw I had some downtime and I recast Golden Vow. And here, so he does that explosion. I don't know the timing for how to dodge it, so what I did was I switched to the Misery Cord that has Endure on it in the right hand. And look at how much fucking damage that does. But I switched to the Misery Cord and I used Endure, because what Endure does is it gives you 45% to all your damage negations, and it gives you super armor, so it makes you immune to all stuns and knockdowns for 3 seconds after you use it. And so if you don't know how to dodge something, or, you know, there's like some tricky attack or some shit coming up, you can switch to Endure and use that real quick and just tank it like I did. But you're about to see me doing this Gaia's fight too. Alright, so let's say you run into an enemy that is either resistant to fire damage or weak to holy damage. What should you do? Well, as a Faith build, you get access to both the Flame Art and the Sacred Affinity. So Flame Art does fire damage, Sacred does holy damage, obviously. So you can easily convert your build. So if you're using the Fire Scorpion Charm in the loadout, you can switch it to the Sacred Scorpion Charm. You can go to the Wondrous Physic and switch the Flame Shroud and Crack tier to the Holy Shroud and Crack tier. And then on whatever Ash of War you're using, you swap it from Flame Art to Sacred, and boom. Now you are set up to do a fuckload of holy damage instead of fire damage. So in this case, Commander Gaius has a 20% weakness to holy damage, so I said, hell yeah, I'm going to use the Sacred Starfist against him, and I'm going to absolutely shred him, as you're going to see in a second. So the Starfist has Endure on it, and so I used Endure to try to tank the charge in case I missed it. You know, you don't have to tank the hit just because you use Endure. You can use Endure as like insurance in case you miss a dodge too. You know, so there I did get the dodge, you know, successfully, but even if I had missed it, I wouldn't have taken that much damage because I had Endure. And then you see what I'm doing is I'm, in most circumstances, I'm using Endure to tank his hits, and then I hit him with a charge heavy attack from the Starfist. It does a ton of damage and a ton of poise damage, and you get Stance Breaks on him. And then I switched over to the Sacred Misery Cord, and I hit him with the crit, and it did a fuckload of damage because he's weak to holy damage. He's doing this attack. I just use Endure and tank it because Endure is awesome. And then, you know, just keep hitting him with the Starfist, and he's going to be dead in like 20 seconds because it's just great. I could have endured that, but I dodged because I wasn't sure if I was going to survive because my health is pretty low. But it doesn't matter. He's dead, you know? So yeah, just because an enemy is resistant to fire damage, like if you were fighting Moog, for example, he has 80% fire negation. He only has 40% holy negation, so just switch everything over to Sacred, and you'll do just fine against him. But yeah, so I'm going to call that the end of the video, because I'm trying to keep this one short. You know, I hope you found this helpful, or at least entertaining. Please leave a like, share the video, and consider subscribing, because it really helps me out. This is a great build, and I had a lot of fun using it. Stay tuned for more Elden Ring content. My name is Diabedor, and I will catch you later.